Welcome to Conversations with the Authors.
Welcome back to Conversations with the Authors. I'm your host, Daniel Troop.
And I'm Daryl.
And I'm Sandra.
And today we're going to have a conversation about cliche and the overuse of them. But before we start, I've got a little story I want you and Ma to evaluate. Now, you guys are the highly rated novelists for How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, so I think you're qualified. It was a dark and stormy night once upon a time, and it was love at first sight. He had a heart of gold, and she was as beautiful as a rose. The calm before the storm, he was a diamond in the rough. But they lived happily ever after, because love conquers all. A little ad-lib story, what do you think?
It sounds like something I've heard before. It's not very fresh.
Does it seem repetitive?
A little bit, by a million years?
Yeah, it seems cliche-ish.
Does it seem, uncreative? Or?
A bit trite, I would say.
Okay.
And dry.
And I guess that would be
unoriginal. Sorry about that.
I guess that would be the problem with cliche. And, Nicholas and How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, you guys don't really fall into the trap of cliche.
Well, actually, we had it in mind to stay away from that, just to steer clear of cliches. Cliches are dead in your story.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And I think for all those authors out there that they want to remember that.
Yes, cliches shouldn't really be used, should they?
No.
Well, not.
Although sometimes they can add a bit of comedy.
It's not in serious writing, but she's writing comedy. But I think if you're a serious writer, and as the narrator of the story, you probably want to avoid cliches unless you're trying to have some kind of comic effect. But if you're a serious writer and you've got this dark, serious story going on, you don't want people to sit back or take them out of the story and say, this is not fresh. This sounds like something I've heard before.
Yeah, so when you talk about cliches, it all sounds French to me. So for some of our newer writers and some of our veteran writers who have had issues with cliche, can you give us a quick, brief explanation of what a cliche is?
Well, a cliche is really something, at one time probably, it was fresh, it was new, there was an author who wrote that, and everybody glommed onto it. And it's something that went down through the centuries. But a cliche is an old, used, I don't know what you would call it, but it's an old used sentence or phrase that someone may just have roll off the top of their tongue. It's things we might use in everyday life.
Right.
When we're trying to explain something to people. A penny saved is a penny earned. I don't think it's very original. Stitch in time saves 9, and that goes all the way back to Poor Richard's Almanac. And some of the things that you mentioned, like a diamond in the rough, some of those things that I mentioned, are things that go back centuries. So it's not very fresh.
So to put this in perspective, some of these phrases are over 300 years old.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So look at it this way. You're going shopping. You're going out to a furniture store, okay? You see some furniture that is 50 years old, okay? That's considered vintage, right?
Yeah, antique, yeah.
So if it's more than 50 years old, if it's 100 years old, it's now it's this vintage item, right? So you've got vintage and you've got antique. So 300 years old. Well,
that's pretty old. And so when you write something, you strive to have something fresh. And that's one objective that you would love to have, and you don't want to kind of pepper and salt it with something so old that people kind of come away from it thinking you've heard it before.
Okay, so let's say you feel the urge to use a cliche. What might you do to, say, revitalize them? Perhaps you want to give a modern take on it, or you want to make it not seem 300 years old.
Well, you know what, you can remodel
Okay.
the sentence if you wanted to, if you were inclined to say something that might come out as a cliche. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. That's a cliche. And I suppose if you really were intent on using that phrase, don't. Maybe change it to to distance nurtures the affectionate heart.
Okay, all right. So what about actions speak louder than words?
Well, how about deeds carry a resounding voice?
Okay.
I mean, but it's not necessary to use cliches. Okay. Try to come up with something original. Now, it is to say that I'm talking about your author, the narrative of the story, the narrator of the story. When he's talking, unless you're doing comedy, you probably don't want to use cliches. Your characters now are like everyday people. They can say anything on the planet.
Right.
Yeah, they can speak poor English. They can speak great English. They can speak another language, and they can use cliches because you must admit, in life, we use them. We use them all the time.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like if we have a kid, you know, who's got to go to school in the morning and they're taking too much time to get things done. You know, we might even go back to Benjamin Franklin and say something like, a stitch in time saves nine,
right?
Whatever that means,
right?
And that's a cliche.
Yeah, it saves nine. What is what I want?
Yeah, I don't know.
I know many of my relatives who like that phrase, only they twist it around. They say a stitch in time saves your behind.
Right, right.
Well, you know what? That's actually fresh.
Right.
That's something that's been changed. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
So it's important for writers to be mindful of these factors and strive to use fresh, original language when writing to avoid, again, falling into these traps. But, you know, as they say, the road to hell is paved in good intentions, right?
Right,
So,
exactly. So, I mean, really, sometimes you'll have to watch yourself because we say these things in everyday life.
Yes.
And so sometimes they can creep into our narrative. And you might not want it to do that, as I said, if you're serious, if you're a serious writer.
Sometimes you go back and you read your own stuff and you say, why did I put that in there? And then you got to take it out.
Mm-hmm. So, narrative, this is you, the author, speaking. This is you, as I put it, in screenwriting, scripts are a instruction book, right?
Okay.
So I think a narrative is sort of that same thing. It's this instruction.
You know, and I suppose you could think of it that way, but a narrator, there are parts of the story that you narrate. You say, Nicholas climbed up onto the horse cart and he looked at the sky and he was thinking about all the things that he could be and he wished that he could fly.
Right.
You know,
yes.
And I'm narrating.
Yes.
I'm not, and I want to be cautious that I don't want to use anything that's going to deaden that language. I want to keep it exciting. I want to keep it fresh. And I don't want him to climb up on the cart and say, and he looked around and he realized it was a really small world. You know, that you know, although we say that in life, that's a cliche.
Right.
And
well, it is a small world after all.
Yeah, right.
And,
yeah, I think there's some amusement park that has a ride for that. But
and they have plenty of room to make Nicholasville.
Okay. All right. So anyway, so just for those who are trying to emerge out of amateur writing and something more professional and become a serious writer, just watch the cliches. Now, if you're writing a comedy, still the narrator might want to watch that, but sometimes a well-placed cliche is funny.
yes.
You know, so
I suppose if you're going to use it for breaking tension or something.
You know,
like
sure,
that.
well, if you have a scene like you said in movie writing, he might say that he was the master of his own destiny, and then when you cut to the scene, he's on a floundering boat and he's not doing very well, and the wind is blowing and his crew is falling overboard.
Right.
So that's funny.
Right. Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
but
There was a master of cliche, and his name was Groucho Marx.
uh-huh.
And when he thought a movie was getting a little bit too serious, he would break the wall and say something that was very cliche.
yeah, it would look right at the camera. So that was comedy,
Right.
good comedy.
Yes, that was the. That was for those of you who don't know Groucho Marx. There's a great line he uses where he says, "There was a elephant in my pajamas. How he got there, I'll never know."
Right. And that was very fresh when he
Yes.
first said it. It's still funny, but it's something that you wouldn't want to use yourself. You'd
Right.
just be
Because-
plagiarizing.
Right. Yes. Don't use Groucho Marx
Right,
phrases
right. So-
and claim them as your own. That
Right.
is, in fact, plagiarism. So cliches are overused phrases. They're ideas, they're plot elements that have become predictable and lack originality. Cliches can make a story feel stale and uninteresting. And as we said in the beginning, my story was a little devoid of creativity. So perhaps making a story, just out of cliche, not the best idea.
Well, but again, remember, your characters can do that. In a story or play, they often use cliches in their speech. It can help establish their personality or reflect their cultural background. However, it should be done sparingly and with purpose. And again, comedy, parody, satire, cliches can be intentionally employed in parody or satire to highlight, their overuse or to create humorous effects.
So how do you define cliche in the context of fantasy and sci-fi fiction?
I think cliches can be visual. I think they can be verbal. I think they're very familiar when you see them.
Predictable.
So I think it's they're probably written as a symptom of intellectual, I don't want to say laziness, but
Deficit?
I think that fits.
Right. So, I'm sorry. There's no deficit. I'm sure it's just the lack of
No.
creativity and, individual. No, I'm sure.
Well, you don't want to speed through things and then have these reflexive statements that pop in your head
Right.
in ordinary life, pop into your story.
Right. Writing is not a Rorschach test. It's you just don't. The first thing that comes to your head is not always the best thing.
He's a man of his words. Be a man of your own words. Right?
Yes, be a man or woman of your own words.
Right?
So, what are the potential drawbacks of using cliche in fantasy and sci-fi writing?
I think if you're writing wouldn't you say, Sandy, if you're writing a serious fantasy, that it can inadvertently turn it into a comedy, and people are laughing at it. I think the crime is if your story is supposed to be delivered as a serious story, yet you've written it in such a way that it can't be taken seriously.
Yes.
I think that the biggest drawback is that it makes both you and your character seem disinterested in your own story.
Have you ever seen? You've seen everybody's seen an A-list movie, A-list stars.
Yeah.
And you've seen B movies too.
Yes.
They have B and C movies.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just like your neighborhood guy who's shooting a movie. Maybe he's a fan of a certain type of genre, and he's shooting this stuff, and he's got all these cliche moves. He's got these cliche sayings, and it looks like a comedy, and you're laughing at it. And he might be trying to be serious, his own version of Batman, and you're just laughing the hell out of it.
Kind of reminds me of like The Simpsons McBain,
Right.
How can writers then avoid the trap of using cliches? brainstorming.
Brainstorming. Right?
I would brainstorming. You know.
Dictionaries.
Yes.
Thesaurus.
Encyclopedias.
Yes.
Thesauruses.
Thesauruses. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Use go the Jurassic.
Yes. Thesauruses. Thesauruses. Yes.
Right.
You know, look up words, other ways to say them. Look up synonyms. You know. Maybe antonyms even.
If it's hard to come up with something, it'll probably be good.
Right.
If it's easy to come up with something, perhaps somebody else thought of it first.
Right.
Use an unabridged dictionary where you can see it used in different languages.
Yes, yes. So, but there are some instances in which cliches could be acceptable in fantasy and sci-fi, even though it's generally discouraged. So, it's really just for humorous plot twists and such, right? It's not really serious.
Well, you know,
like you said, it's not really. If you're doing serious, be serious. If
you're
doing
serious
comedy,
narrator. As the author who's telling the story to other people, try not to use cliches, because you're not trying to be friends with your audience necessarily. You're trying to convey a story. You're trying to put them in the story, not sound like their next door neighbor. So you want it to, unless you're doing a comedy, then it's perfectly acceptable that you might do that.
You also want to give your audience credit for their own intelligence.
Yes, absolutely. I like to assume that they know. It's kind of like with the kids as they're growing up. I assume children know what I'm talking about until you ask me what did I just say.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss.
I like to give you the benefit of the doubt. You know?
Penny for your thoughts.
Yes. So, I say so a lot when I start kind of questions, don't I? When
it's not a cliche.
it's a catchphrase.
It's not even a Nick cliche.
There's a difference between a catchphrase and a cliche. A catchphrase is something that your characters might say. They're known for saying like "Yippee-o-ki-yay" or "I'll be back" or. I'm sure there's more. I just can't think of them at the moment. Or so.
Let's get nuts.
Yes. Or I'm Batman. Does that count? Yes. But there is a way to strike a balance, right, between incorporating familiar elements with the readers so that it resonates and avoiding cliche. And this is like with tropes, right? But tropes are good. Tropes are as you call them, driving forces. These are
they're themes.
These are the themes of the story.
At some point in these podcasts, we may have mentioned that.
Yes.
The tropes are themes.
So introducing unexpected elements or providing unique perspective, challenges, things like that, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's the key, really, is trying to just don't, as you said. Don't.
You know, and you avoid them. Like I said, you avoid them the way you avoid throwing lit matches around your house. Just don't do it.
Don't do that either. Don't throw lit matches around your house. Or if you happen to live in glass houses, don't throw stones. Okay. That is also something you don't want to do.
Yeah, also a cliche.
Also a cliche, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, do you have any other sort of last-minute thoughts for our readers or writers or listeners about cliches and writing, or perhaps how you avoided such things with How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, which awards you such... wonderful reviews.
Well, just be original.
Yes.
And just think very hard. For me, I've had a perfectly wonderful evening. This wasn't it, though. Sorry about that. No, it was. But that's a Groucho Marx. So.
But as Groucho says, these are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others. So thank you, of course, Mom and Dad, for your input, and thank you, Alexander Nakarada, for our wonderful intro as always. Congratulations on the nomination for your book award.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Eric Hoffer.
Yes, and
it's not a really award. We had a nomination.
Yes, well then, it's
and as they say at the Academy Awards, I'm just thankful to be nominated.
Yes,
that's all.
Yes, and you'll be at the ALA
Yes, absolutely.
which is the American Library Association. This is the largest library association in the world. So if you love books and you love libraries and figuring out what's on the shelf, show up, get a signed copy, as long as supplies last. And if you want a copy of this book, you can visit our website at troopbooks.com, our Instagram, oh look, already a visitor, we're TikTok and our Instagram at troopbooks.com, that's TROUPE. You can, you'll be taken to the author page at troopbooks.com, where you can pick up a copy of the hardcover or the softcover, and we'll talk to you next time on Conversations with the Authors.